Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Talking about a really interesting topic. So, why are we talking about this? A lot of my seminars, webinars, we talk about a legal issue. We'll talk about something, anything from a new law that has come out or potential liability for medical directors and clinics. Um, the topics run the gamut. And oftentimes it has to do with a lot of the stuff that we're talking to clients about, often hot button issues. Maybe once a year I do a seminar on physician employment agreements because I get asked about those a lot, especially this time of year when people are graduating from school and taking on new jobs. Uh, this topic is a little different, but it's something that I encounter regularly in my practice. I have a regular law practice. I've practiced law for over 20 years. But why am I talking about the psychology of settlement and negotiation? Well, in addition to my law practice, I also serve as a mediator for other parties who are in dispute. And that came about because I did several years of litigation, realized that a couple of things. One, litigation is really good for business minded clients, entrepreneurial type folks. Sometimes you're in a lawsuit and you can't avoid it. Obviously, if you're in a car accident or if there's a simple contract dispute, somebody takes off with your money, you may not have a choice. You end up in a lawsuit. But oftentimes, with more complex business disputes among business partners, owners, uh, medical groups, insurance companies that don't have to do with slip and fall or personal injury cases, inheritance disputes. There's a lot of other circumstances where parties become entangled with each other, and in my view, would be much better off talking and working towards resolution than fighting in court. And so I started my mediation practice a few years ago. Uh, with that in mind, it was the idea that I was talking a lot of clients out of litigation in my law practice. I was gravitating, moving more from a litigation practice to a transactional based practice, which is most of my law practice today, even though we do have litigators in the office. And then I started taking on mediations. It started with an occasional mediation, and now I mediate somewhere between 4 to 8 disputes per month, typically among parties that are in a lawsuit or in a pre-litigation stance. And over the past couple of years, I've seen patterns that have developed. I have a specific and particular interest in how these circumstances play out because you see that people don't act always rationally. Um, I have a background, my degree before law school, my undergraduate degree is in psychology. I'm familiar with some of the terms and some of the communication issues. And since I've been practicing law and especially in connection with the mediation practice, I've been focused more and more on the psychology that drives people in these disputes and can help influence people towards settlement. I've talked in the past about some authors that I particularly like. Robert Cialdini's work is fantastic. He wrote essentially a book on influence and certain principles of influence among parties, and that has expanded and been expanded upon by him and other collaborators. Chris Voss's recent material is very, very good. Jim Camp. There's some other techniques, obviously, getting to yes in the initial works of the Harvard negotiation project sort of kicked a lot of this off. People are very familiar with certain terms and concepts that have come out of the Getting to Yes Foundation, BATNA, Best Alternative to a Negotiated Arrangement. Um, the idea of listening first and understanding and negotiating from an interest-based negotiation rather than positions. But even with all of that, I have found that the tools aren't always adequate. And I've been starting to form my own foundation from which I negotiate and handle mediations with parties. And I'm going to give you a little insight into some of what I have learned and what I've started writing about. I'm working now, I've been working for the last several months on a book discussing these topics, really focusing on not on BATNA and not on what can you get out of a negotiation, but really what drives settlement, particularly in circumstances where parties are deeply entangled with one another. BATNA is a great tool, best alternative to a negotiated arrangement. If I go in to buy a car, if I walk in a store, I don't like the price, what's my BATNA? Well, I can walk out and go somewhere else and I can look for a car. I can opt not to buy a car. I can look for a different type of car. That happens a lot. If I don't like a certain restaurant, I can go find something else. If I am looking to maybe do an investment and I don't really like the terms of that investment, I can look at something else. But what if I have a business partner for 10 years and we have several different business interests and we're deeply entwined and now we need to separate because we're not getting along? Well, if you think that the best alternative is just to simply let things go as they are, that's not always going to work. Sometimes parties end up in lawsuits. A lawsuit isn't a great alternative for something like that. I've seen it destroy too many businesses. In those circumstances, I believe that people are motivated by other factors, and particularly the desire to avoid loss. And that's really what today's seminar is about. It's this concept of loss aversion, prospect theory. We'll talk about a little bit of the foundation of that and what drives people to settlement, particularly in deeply entwined in entanglements where it's not real easy to just walk away and you have to work out a deal. So I'm going to jump into our slides. I encourage you to fire away any questions during the seminar or after if you'd like to talk about this. If you're interested in this topic, I'm happy to share a sneak preview of a chapter that I've written on this topic for the book that I plan to finish within the next probably the next month or two. And I'll be happy to share that material with you as well. Here's the agenda that we'll talk about. The core principle is loss aversion. Loss aversion shows up in everyday circumstances. And we'll talk through some examples, and I'll show you some interesting studies and get you thinking about some things from a little bit different perspective, hopefully by the end of the seminar today. We'll talk about prospect theory and the endowment effect, the framing effect, and how you can use framing in your everyday language to maybe achieve better outcomes. And we'll start with some low stakes examples or low stakes opportunities that you can use framing, such as where I use it often is in personal relationships, dealing with my spouse, dealing with my kids, dealing with coworkers, employees, and partners. And if you figure that you frame the way you frame language often makes a difference, and we'll figure out how that works a little bit more deeply. All right, so initial concept here. Uh, The problem that and as I said in the beginning, the issue that I discovered early was that people are not always rational when it comes to settlement, when it comes to negotiation, and trying to figure out what drives people has led me to looking at other reasons that people strike deals and what do people think about. And we find that psychology plays a lot on how people make decisions and causes them sometimes to not make the most rational decisions. And we're going to take a little background here. Give me five, indulge me for maybe 5, 7 minutes to talk about the psychology of this. This all starts with a concept of prospect theory. And this was a concept developed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky over a course of several studies. There's some books on this. You can find many of them. And it became so famous that the author, Michael Lewis, who writes a lot of financial stuff, also wrote Moneyball and the football movie based on the player that was an orphan ended up becoming an NFL football player. In any event, Michael Lewis has written some stuff it's fun to look at, and he wrote a book on Kahneman and Tversky developing prospect theory. And prospect theory essentially focuses on this concept of loss aversion, and that is that people feel the pain of loss uh, twice as much by some estimates as they feel the emotional high of gain. And we'll see an example of this that'll help you get a clearer picture. I want you to take a walk with me for a moment and imagine that you're walking down the street and you find $100 on the street. And with that find, you go home and it's a nice little rush. You just found something you didn't have. You got some extra cash in your pocket. You think, okay, maybe I splurge for a nice dinner. I buy my spouse a nice gift or something for my kids. You're a little bit ahead of where you were. Is it going to change your life? No. Is it going to, is it something that's going to give you a high for a couple days? Probably not. But it's nice in the moment. Now, I want you to stop and try and erase that from your brain for a moment and imagine that you've got cash in your pocket and you show up to your destination, wherever you plan to go. Maybe go to eat or you're going to a meeting with someone. You reach in your pocket and you find that you just lost $100. What does that feel like? And for most people, that feeling of loss is much more impactful than the gain of finding $100. And the insight is here is that we're talking about the same amount of money, but the emotional impact of the find versus the loss is substantially further or substantially different. Now, I want to take this one step further, and this is another exercise that I think elucidates this concept a little bit more. Now imagine that you are out and about and you find $100 on the street and it's two $50 bills. And now you put it in your pocket, you look around, maybe you're a good Samaritan, you're trying to figure out if somebody dropped it, and you end up putting in your pocket, okay, you found $100. Now you get wherever you're going and you reach in your pocket and you realize that you lost 50. So you're still ahead $50 from where you started. But most people in those circumstances feel worse about the 50 that they lost than the 100 that they gained. And if you doubt this, think about it in terms of investments. Think of, if any of you have ever made an investment, if you do your own stock market investing, and you buy a stock, and let's say you bought, I don't know, let's say you bought Nvidia at $100, and you made out really well, and now Nvidia has gone to $200. It's done much better than that over years, but let's just say you buy a stock at $100 and it goes to $200. Now you go to sell it. And when you go to sell it, something happens, you get delayed, your sell order doesn't go through, and you end up selling it. But when you go to sell it, now it's down to 175. How disappointed are you that you missed out on the $200 sale? How many people try to time the market to sell at the very highest price they can sell for? Well, the concept in play is loss aversion. People appreciate gains, but they really feel the pain of loss. And as we're going to find out, we can work with that in settlement discussions and in negotiations to use it to our advantage. So what we're going to talk about next here is something called the endowment effect. And this was highlighted by another famous study by Tversky and Kahneman, where they got a group of people, put them into two separate groups. One group was given a mug. It's just a standard coffee mug, and another group didn't have anything. And now they were paired up and asked to negotiate the sale or the transfer of that mug. And the owners of the mug, the people who were given the mug, were asked the minimum price at which they would sell the mug. And the price that they gave was somewhere around $7. And then people who did not have the mug were asked for the maximum price that they would pay for the mug. And the maximum price they were willing to pay was only about $3. Well, if we're all rational creatures, we should look at, especially if you take a group of people, you may have outliers, right? One or two people think the mug is worth a lot more. A couple people think it's worth a lot less. Maybe if you're a big coffee drinker, if you collect mugs or it has a logo that you like, there's something of particular value. But in general, if you take a room of people and polled a room of people about the value of the mug, you should get similar numbers in value. Why is it that the group that was given the mug to start with gave it a substantially higher value than the group that was not given anything to start with? And this goes back to the theory of loss aversion. It's something called the endowment effect. And essentially what the study found, and this has been shown over and over in different circumstances, and I'm about to give you some examples to look at yourself. What the study found is that because people who are already holding and in possession of the mug, now if they had to give up the mug, were experiencing loss aversion. They didn't want to give up the mug and go through that feeling of loss. But people who didn't have the mug, they didn't strive as much to obtain it. They didn't feel as much of a gain of getting this mug. They weren't willing to give up anything that they had, particularly dollars, to obtain the mug. And so the idea that came out of this is that when we have something and we already possess something, we give it a lot more value than someone else does, typically, if they would have to acquire it. And the concept is the endowment effect. Now, what do we take away from this when we're talking about negotiations and settlement? If you're bargaining for a particular position or a particular concession in a negotiation, and somebody else places a very high value on something that you don't place value on, don't argue with them. Um, we're not going to make headway. You're not going to make progress trying to argue with them about the value of the item because this is psychology. This is loss aversion in play. You've got to approach it from a different tactic, use different techniques. Uh, and two that you can use are here on the slide. You can try to paint a picture of something else that they will gain by making a concession. Maybe depending on what that item is, they'll be free to explore new opportunities. They'll simplify their business. They'll uh, have the cash that they gain from selling an item will give them a new infusion of capital into the business. Or, and another way to do this is you can frame an avoided loss if you help them see that by clinging to that particular item, that particular position that they won't give up, it actually causes them to lose out on other opportunities, lose out on other areas where they could gain, lose out on other business that they could obtain, other investments that they can make. Try to reframe it rather than arguing about the value of the particular item and their rational attachment to that item. Try to trade it for something else and show them that by giving it up, they actually avoid loss somewhere else. Now we're going to put this into a little personal challenge because I want for today, I'm going to give you a couple exercises and try to encourage you to go do this on your own in case you have any doubts about what we're talking about. So you see this a lot, by the way, when you're cleaning out a garage or an attic, if you've ever cleaned out old space. This is, I believe, why people hoard. I think people, as they get older, they tend to gather things, they don't get rid of them. How many people have older relatives, an old uncle or a friend or a relative who won't get rid of anything? They're saving stuff that you know they're never going to live. Somebody that's saving a bunch of blank 8-track tapes, milk cartons, egg crates. I've seen cardboard boxes, shopping bags. People collect stuff and they hold on to it. And the reason they hold on to it has a lot to do with the endowment effect. So on your own, go home and take an old item that you haven't used in a while. Just go into your garage, go into your attic, and grab an old jacket or your closet, maybe an old piece of sports equipment. I know I've got some of this stuff sitting in my attic. Now, think to yourself hard, if I were to sell this, what's the minimum price I would try to sell it for? And write the number down. And you could even have somebody play along if you've got a spouse or somebody wants to do this with you. Now, flip the script and ask the buyer's question. If I didn't own this, I was going to go out and buy it now, what's the maximum price I would pay for it? And most people, if they're being honest, they're going to find that those numbers are two different things. Um, this, I think, shows up a lot. I'm going to relate it back to investing. I have a good friend who always talks about stock investing. He says, if I don't like the price of a stock today, if it's not something I would buy, then I don't hold it. And how many people will invest in the stock market, buy a stock, hold it to a low price that they would never buy the stock at, and they hold it because they think it's going to come back? If the stock is worth less than what you think it was, if you wouldn't buy the stock today, then you have to ask a serious question. Why are you holding on to it when there's other opportunities out there? And if you're not focused on the opportunity cost and the opportunity to invest in something else, I think what happens is too often people just get stuck in the idea that they're holding something of value and they don't want to give it up because they're not thinking about the opportunity cost. They're not thinking about everything else that they could obtain if they gave this up. And that's the job. That's my job in mediation and in negotiation, is to try and get people thinking about what are you giving up by attaching to this particular item. And I ask people to often be open-minded. I try to explore different possibilities. Is there something you can trade? Is there something else you can gain by giving up on one side and gain something else that could potentially be of more value? And then frame that as a potential loss. Now, with the endowment effect, That's going to help us when we talk about the buyer, your buyer number or your seller number, the way you look at things and the way you phrase things. And we're going to see how that plays out in another concept here, and that's the framing effect. So again, this goes back to the idea of people not wanting to suffer losses, and they're more inclined to avoid loss than to try and work towards gain. So here's a simple exercise that I think this was another one that maybe from Kahneman. This may have been from some other folks who worked on the same concepts that Kahneman and Tversky worked on. And this all goes back to prospect theory, loss aversion. And they asked people to consider these two different offers. And I think this has actually been done by sending things out to a select group of participants who agreed to participate in the study. So offer number one, think about how often this happens in your own life. You have a rebate form, and if you fill out the form and submit it, you get a rebate. Maybe it's $20, maybe it's $5, something else. Now, how many people will take time to fill out the form, stamp the envelope, stuff it, put it in the box where it needs to go, and send it in and look out? And how many people will track the rebate, by the way? Think about how many times you apply for a rebate and you never see the rebate. My wife and I joke about this. We used to submit these forms and almost think you never get the rebate until you call the company. Nobody tracks it. Why don't people track it? Because it's small, you don't think much of it, and you're not too worried about it. But now if you flip this around, you flip the script and you are told that you'll be charged an additional penalty, a $20 penalty, if you fail to submit a form. This happens sometimes. Where do we see this? It's like in deposits. You make a deposit, say on old cable TV box, or some old worthless equipment, and the company says if you don't return this, or if you don't account for it, or give us some wires back, we won't return your deposit. Maybe the deposit is something small, or you'll have to pay a fee or a penalty. And let's take the same number, $20. How many people will go through the effort of filling out a form and submitting it in order to avoid the $20 loss? And what the study found, and inherently, I think we know this to be true, more people will work towards avoiding the loss and take the action that's necessary than folks who will do the same work to get the gain. Again, this is loss aversion, and then it's the framing effect. If you frame something as a gain, people act one way. If you frame it as a loss, people are more inclined to act to avoid the loss. All right, now let's go to another thing that's a little bit deeper into this framing effect. So the idea is that when choices are framed as gains, people become risk averse. When choices are framed as losses, people tend to take risk, and they take the risk. They're willing to take on risk to avoid the loss. They don't want to lose a gain. If the gain is if it's a sure thing. But if they know they're going to suffer a loss, they're willing to take on risk to avoid the loss. They're willing to be more open-minded. They're willing to explore different possibilities to avoid loss. This all goes back to our negotiation. This all goes back to getting people to think about concepts and deal points. If we're in a complex mediation where parties are deeply entangled, how do we get them to explore other possibilities, other ideas? If you're in a fight with your kids over dinner or homework, how do you get them to think differently? How do you get them to think that certain classes in school are important, or things that you think are important, like cleaning up the room? The way you frame it, it's not the benefit of a clean room, it's the avoiding loss of potentially losing things in the room, avoiding loss of having a dirty room where you have bugs and now you have a room that you can't enjoy. The idea that you're going to lose something versus the power of an equivalent gain. All right, now we're going to move to another study. This one's really cool. This is the disease outbreak study. And maybe some of you heard about this or read about it, but I'm going to walk through it step by step. And I want you to preferably, if you have a piece of paper or something to write down your answer, please participate and play along with us here. So in this classic study of the disease outbreak, this was before COVID, and actually it's almost become more real with COVID, but the numbers are of course a lot different. So folks were asked to imagine that the U.S. is preparing for an outbreak of a disease that's expected to kill approximately 600 people, and there's a potential vaccine strategy or treatment strategy, and you get to choose. You're one of the people who gets to choose which approach we take to combat this disease. So in the first scenario, people were asked to choose between two alternatives. Program A, and that one provides that 200 people will certainly be saved. And program B is the alternative. And in that one, there's more risk involved. 1/3 probability that 600 people will be saved. So your options are 200 definitely saved or 1/3 probably saved. Now, and of course, 1/3 probably saved, 2/3 it won't be. Which one do you choose? And write it down, program A or program B. Think about that. In the study, and this has been replicated several times, people chose program A at a rate of 72%. Almost 3 out of 4 people chose program A over program B. And the reason that is explained for this is that when this choice is framed as a gain, saving 200 people or a 1/3 possibility of saving everybody, we become risk averse. We don't want to take that possibility that some won't be saved. We know that we can save 200. So we take that action. All right, same thing. Disease, 600 people. You're given the option uh, to pick a program that we will use to combat the disease. This is the second scenario. Program C, 400 people will die. So you know that if you pick that one, you're got 400 dead. Program D, 1/3 probability that nobody will die. Which one of those do you choose? And I'm going to give you a minute to write that one down. All right. What do you think? In this scenario, 78% of people, more than 2/3, or pardon me, more than 3/4, chose program D. When the choice is framed as a loss, as a certain loss, 400 people will die, we become risk seeking. We choose the alternative because the alternative gives us an opportunity to avoid the loss of 400 certainly dying. So more people chose D than C. Now, if you think about why you do this, what were your own decisions? I'm curious what people selected who were watching. What did you pick? In the first one, did you pick A or B? In the second one, did you pick C or D? Now we're going to see if your decisions were consistent and if your decisions were rational. And we find that most people are not. And here's what the study shows. Let's take a look at our options again. Scenario 1, program A, 200 saved. Program B, 1/3 probability 600 will be saved. C, 400 will die. D, 1/3 probability nobody dies. Mathematically, A and C, compare them. 200 people saved versus 400 dying. And program B and D, mathematically, they are exactly the same. Why do 2/3 of the people, or 3/4 of the people, pardon me, in the first scenario pick program A? And why do those more than 3/4 of people in the second scenario pick program B? And the reason that psychologists, behavioral psychologists, and behavioral economists believe, and I've seen this play out, is that people act to avoid loss. If they know that a loss is a sure thing, they're willing to take risks. They're willing to explore more opportunities to try to avoid that loss. If they have the gain locked in, they don't want to take the risk. They become more principled and they just want to stand on their gain. That's why when people feel like they're ahead, it's harder to get them to negotiate. When people feel like they're behind, think of this again in your own life. Think of it how you've applied it over years with decisions that you've made. If you've ever suffered an investment loss, and hopefully you don't have to do that too often. If you ever have suffered, how many people lose? How many people have gone to a casino and they're already down a little bit and they're like, oh, all right, and they're going to take more risks to try and get back what they already lost. They're going to try and pick up the gain by taking more risks. That's what this study shows, is that more people tend to do this. So what does this mean? And how can we apply it to our own practice? How can we apply it in our own negotiations and in our own life? And here I'm going to give you a couple ideas. So the first one is we're going to try and reframe language and get you into a habit of reframing language to get what you want. And we'll try this in some low stakes scenarios. Um, and the first one here is what I call the homework task, because you can do this. You can do it with your kids. You can do it with other family members, spouses, friends you're trying to negotiate dinner plans with. Very low stakes environment. So, and then you can, once you get it down in a low stakes environment, you could try it in gradually increasing stakes. So for those of you, I have young kids, 12 and 8. And so I'm constantly in a state of negotiation with them and trying to get them to respond to me. And my wife is constantly frustrated by the fact that they seem to respond differently to me than they do to her. And that could be for a number of different reasons, but I am compelled to believe that part of it is the way we communicate and the way I talk to them and the way I negotiate with them. So you're trying to get your kid to do homework or whatever the task is, clean up the room. And you say, if you do your homework now, you have the rest of the night free to play. That's your gain frame. And that's essentially selling them on the idea that if they do what you want now, they're going to gain something later. And how often does that work for you? And so try this next time. Put this a similar circumstance in play. And I would love to hear a week from now if you did this and you got a certain result. Try that first, and then a little while later, if whoever you're negotiating with is not responding, whatever the level of negotiations, um, then try it from a loss frame. If you do your homework now, you're not going to lose, or if you don't do your homework, rather, different ways you could say it. But if you don't do your homework now, you are going to lose a big chunk of your free time later, and you'll be stuck inside with your school books doing your homework. So you're framing it as a loss. If you don't act now, you're going to be stuck inside later. If you don't clean up your room now, you're going to be stuck inside doing it while your friends are out doing something else. If you don't get your work done during the week, then on the weekend, when you want to take the car out and go out with your friends, you're not going to be able to do that because you won't have done everything you need to do during the week. It's not the reward at the end of the week. It's the pain or the threat that they're going to lose something. They're going to lose an opportunity later if they don't act now. So here's another way you can try it. You can practice switching from a gain frame to a loss frame to influence people to act and try to get them to take action that you want them to take. That ultimately is going to be beneficial for both of you. And that's where this really works well. So here's your dinner decision. How many people have had this conversation? If you're in a relationship with a significant other, a spouse, or someone else, you've undoubtedly gotten stuck on your dinner conversation or movie, pick your circumstance. So gain frame. If we go to that new restaurant, we get a really nice, relaxing evening outside, et cetera, et cetera. Now that doesn't work, or it gets into a discussion of, well, what are the other alternatives? Where else could we potentially go? Then switch it up into a loss frame. I'm worried if we don't make a decision soon, we're going to lose our chance for a nice night and we'll end up frustrated and settling for takeout again. So how often does that happen to you anyway? So now you change it. Hey, if we don't do something, we're going to end up stuck and we're going to lose out on a good evening. Try that approach. Gain frame versus loss frame. And observe how framing the same situation in the same language creates a greater sense of urgency when you frame it as a loss. All right. So what do we take out of this? Thank you so far for your patience and joining me. We're going to finish up probably a couple minutes earlier than usual today. But these are great concepts, I think, and they're very deep. I could go into a few other examples of how you can use this both in your regular life and then start to gradually apply it in business. And you'll have to think about it sometimes. Plan this stuff out. When I'm working with parties in mediation, I sometimes take a little break in between the caucus sessions and I think about how I'm going to frame something. It doesn't always come perfectly naturally. How I reverse it and frame it into a loss frame to get people thinking about, oftentimes if deeply entangled conflicts, that's where this usually really works in the mediation context. How do we avoid the big potential loss? How do we avoid all the negative consequences? We avoid that loss. We avoid the negative consequences by taking some other action, and then give them alternatives. Give them what we call a golden bridge. Give them an opportunity to pick something else instead of the negative outcome. So if you want to apply this in your daily life, think about controlling the frame. If you're not actively setting a frame, then chances are you're working with your counterparts frame, and they're often focused on a gain frame rather, because that's where people normally focus. They normally focus on what's in it for me. What am I going to gain if I do this? You've got to change their thinking. When you really want to move people, you've got to change them to thinking about what are they going to lose? Uh, and become very, very good when you're dealing with people. Again, practice this at home, practice this in a low stakes environment. Get used to thinking about what motivates, what moves people to decisions. Are they talking about their upside? Are they talking about what's in it for them? Are they talking about gain? Or are they talking about potential loss? There are folks who are focused on losses. I have some, and oddly, I would say probably some of my most analytical law clients and some people who have really done the best with building businesses tend to be driven from a loss avoidance mentality. I don't know if that's coincidence or if there's something to putting those pieces together, but people who are driven from a loss avoidance tend to be very successful, which isn't to say that being goal motivated and motivated by positive outcomes isn't good for you as well. It's just an interesting observation that fewer people look at it in terms of avoiding losses, and those people tend to do particularly well. So when you're talking to folks, try and listen, try and become a really good listener, and not only understanding their position, which is great, understanding the interest that's driving them, but understand the way that they're framing it. If you're in a dispute with somebody, are they framing their position as what they stand to gain or things that they hope to avoid? If you're in an employment dispute with somebody, are they talking about the benefits of salary, the benefits that they'll get from employment? Or are they talking about avoiding being jobless, being homeless, being destitute, losing out on opportunities? What's their frame? And if their frame is, if they're in a positive frame and you want to change that, you need to start using different language to change the frame. Become really good at changing the frame and use that to change the way that conversations go when you're negotiating with people. And what I like to say here is that your goal is to persuade people not through coercion, but through influence. You're not trying to coerce people, you're trying to influence them by the shade that you illuminate the path with. And that's the takeaway for today. How can you put this into effect right now when you finish up? And we'll see if there's any comments or questions. There might be some. Uh, Go home and try the endowment effect. Go into your garage, go into your attic, go somewhere and pull out an old item that you haven't dug into. Pull a box open that hasn't been opened in a year or two and figure out why are you still holding on to this stuff and what do you think the value is? And then if you really want to test it, ask somebody else what they think the value is, and see how different those numbers are. And then try the framing challenge. Try this in your everyday life with somebody else that you interact with on a regular basis. And again, we're not trying, the goal isn't perfection here. The goal is simply to try to get used to listening to the way other people talk, the way other people take positions, the way they hold on to those positions, and what motivates them, and how you can motivate them to see things differently, and how you can motivate them to change, and look at different viewpoints, potentially to influence them to make better decisions. If your kids do their homework to avoid being stuck in on the weekend, and they get to go socialize with friends and do the other things that they want to do, that is a better outcome for them. We all know that inherently, but trying to motivate them based on the gain is not going to be effective as motivating them by avoiding the loss. The same goes for people who are much older and more sophisticated that we deal with in daily life. And I will tell you that in my mediation practice, I certainly see this significantly more, that people want to avoid loss. That's why I spend a lot of time in mediations talking about what I call essentially the conflict tax, which is the costs of lawsuits, the monetary costs in particular of hiring lawyers and experts, the time that it takes, how much time people are going to invest into a dispute over months and years, and then the emotional toll that this takes. That's a heavy burden. And when we talk about that and all of the sacrifice that people have to make to be deeply involved in a conflict, to be deeply entangled and stay there, other alternatives start to become much, much more attractive.
So I
I'll,
have a question.
yeah, we'll open up the questions. Great.
So, I guess, okay, how to create a frame with a toxic partner who ignores reasons for separation and just wants your money to do, or do you learn more towards the end or gain? Do you learn more towards a gain or a loss frame?
I believe almost, especially, I mean, what a great question. When it comes to toxic relationships with partners, be it, you know, these could be business partners, domestic partners. The one thing that doesn't work well is to stay in that relationship, right? This is a perfect example of an entangled relationship that you can't, there's no BATNA, there's no best alternative. Okay, we're going to ignore this and we're going to walk away. So you have to approach this from a viewpoint of, for you, what's it costing you? You want to separate from the relationship because you see that you know all the costs that it's taking. You need to get the other side to start thinking about that. Hey, if we don't deal with this situation now, we're going to be stuck in this and potentially ruin our business. If we don't deal with this situation soon, where it's potentially going to take effect on our patients, on our clients, on our coworkers. We have a good business. Are we going to continue to have a good business if we don't fix the broken relationship that we have now? All of those things are, in my view, much better motivators for folks than just saying, hey, if we break up now, or if we sit down and talk, we could figure out a way to make a little bit more money together. Or if we sit down and talk, we could figure out how you can have part of the business and I can have part of the business. No, the idea is that you're really, in those situations, you're destroying the golden egg the longer this goes on. Those type of situations are perfect for having that conversation. And I didn't present this as a pitch for mediation, but I will say that there are certain circumstances and partnership conflicts, business partners in particular. I deal with a lot of those where, people say, well, why can't we just sit down and negotiate face to face? Well, the reason for that, I believe, again, there's a big psychological impediment to face-to-face negotiations, and that is if I'm either involved in a conflict myself or I'm representing a client and I'm involved in a conflict, psychology says I can't listen, obtain information from the other side, and make my point or prepare my arguments at the same time. It's very difficult, even if in a trial context. The greatest trial lawyers are the ones who are really good at listening, can stop and put aside their questions and their strategy, and then think better on their feet. In negotiations, it's very difficult. And think about this in your own life, and arguing with a business partner, or arguing with a sibling or a spouse. When people are deep in an argument, they're not, it's very hard to listen, understand the other side, and then make your points. And so people don't do that. When the worse the relationship gets, and that's what happens, that's how you end up in lawsuits, is people are just trying to make their point and they're not listening to the other one. And there's so many times when I am mediating disputes between parties where I don't have a dog in a fight. I'm not trying to make a position. I'm trying to understand one side, understand the positions and the interests and what's motivating them, understand the other side, their positions, interests, what's motivating them, try sometimes to reframe those positions into a loss avoidance mode and get them both thinking about the shared catastrophic loss of losing their business, of what the relationship is costing them in the long run. And that's a great advantage for a neutral third party. So I would encourage you to talk to others, and if you have a trusted neutral that you can bring into the fray, that works well. Or if it gets to a point where you're really looking at just an unsalvageable relationship between partners, consider bringing in a neutral third party to help mediate that dispute, to understand the interests, and then get people focused on the larger picture loss avoidance, which is oftentimes with business situations, the destruction of the entire business, either temporarily or permanently. All right. Awesome question. I wonder if we've got anything else here. And again, you've got seminar materials, and uh, if you um, have any further questions on this, I would love if you give me some feedback if people are able to take these concepts and apply them in your day-to-day life. And if you would like a preview, a sneak preview of the chapter that I wrote on this topic, or another chapter maybe that I wrote on the concept of avoiding catastrophic loss and negotiating from a standpoint of loss avoidance, what I call RECO, the realistic expectation of a catastrophic outcome. That's sort of the flip side of the coin from BATNA. I'll be happy to share materials on that and talk about it a little bit further. And if there's nothing else, maybe we wrap up early.
I don't have any other questions, Eric. You want to go to the last slide?
Yes, sir. There we go. Apologies for that. There we go.
All right.
Information on there. And if, again, further questions on this, if there's other topics you'd like to hear us talk about, particularly, I love the psychology of settlements and negotiations. I'm going to cover some of these topics more deeply in the next several months. If this is of value to you and you want to talk about it more, if there's a particular topic you'd like me to cover, or maybe a particular example. And some of these, what I'll try to do every time I do one of these is I'll use a different example, maybe business disputes. I often deal with folks in healthcare businesses, technology, partnerships, startups, law practices I've dealt with, other professional practices. And I can take maybe just a generic example and try to toss it into a seminar, maybe where it has some practical application. So thanks again for your attention today.